At 72 degrees below zero, the forest holds its breath. Nothing moves. Nothing dares. In the Republic of Saka, winter is not a season. It is a permanent condition of the soul. She had lived here for 46 years, alone for the last 12. Every morning began the same way, checking the fire, checking the water, checking the silence. But this morning, the silence broke. A sound came from beyond the tree line, faint, desperate, almost human. She knew every sound the forest made. This one, she had never heard before. She pulled on her heaviest coat and stepped into the teeth of the cold. The cold hit her face like a wall of needles. Her eyelashes froze within seconds. She followed the sound through the birch trees, each step sinking knee-deep into the snow. Then she saw it, a small shape in the snow, orange against white, barely moving. A tiger cub, alone, its ribs sharp beneath its fur. She stopped breathing for a moment. In 46 years, she had never seen a tiger this far north. It let out a thin, ragged cry. The sound of something too young to understand. It was dying. She didn't think. She knelt. Her hands, shaking from the cold, reached beneath the tiny body. It weighed almost nothing, like holding a heartbeat wrapped in frost. She turned back toward the cabin. The wind had picked up. The temperature was still falling. Every step was a negotiation between her old body and the frozen earth. She made it to the door, pushed it open with her shoulder, and brought the forest inside. She laid the cub beside the stove. It didn't move, but it was breathing. She sat on the floor beside it, her back against the wall, and watched its ribs rise and fall. For the first time in 12 years, she was not alone. Morning came slowly in Yakutia. The sun barely cleared the tree line before it began to fall again. She had built this cabin with her husband, Victor, when they were still young enough to believe in permanence. Victor had been a trapper. He knew every ridge and river within 100 kilometers. He died in the winter of 2014, a heart attack in the snow. She found him by the woodpile. After that, she considered leaving. But where would she go? This cold was all she knew. Her mornings followed a rhythm as old as the forest itself. First, the fire. Everything else depended on it. Then water. She would chip ice from the barrel outside and melt it on the stove. Then food, whatever she had dried, salted, or stored from the autumn. She looked at the cub. It hadn't moved from the blanket. Its breathing was thin but steady. She warmed a small cup of water and held it near its mouth. It didn't drink, not yet, but she would wait. Outside, the wind was building again. The walls groaned under its weight. She had enough firewood for perhaps 10 more days. After that, she would have to cut more. She thought about the cub's mother. Where was she? What had happened? Siberian tigers were rare here. Ghosts of the far south. Poachers had taken most of them. A cub this young, alone, it meant the mother was gone, permanently. She had raised animals before. Dogs, a goat, once, but never anything wild, never anything dangerous. But this was not a decision. It was a reflex. You do not leave a living thing to freeze. By midday, the cub opened its eyes. 2 pale amber circles, looking at nothing and everything. She offered water again. This time, it drank. Just a few drops, but it drank. She mixed dried fish broth with water and heated it slowly. She let the broth cool, then soaked a cloth and held it to the cub's mouth. It took the broth slowly. Each swallow a small act of survival. That night, she slept on the floor beside the stove. The cub's breathing was the only lullaby she needed. She woke twice to feed the fire. Each time, she checked the cub first. By the second morning, the cub lifted its head on its own. It looked at her with something she couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or the beginning of trust. She spoke to it softly, not because it would understand, but because silence was a habit she wanted to break. She called it Kiska, an old word nearly forgotten. It meant little warmth. The nearest village was 40 kilometers south. She had not been there since September. In September, she had traded furs for flour, salt, and medicine. That was her last human contact. She didn't miss people, but she missed being seen. On the third day, she went outside to check the snare lines. The cold had not relented. The snares were empty. The rabbits had gone deeper into the forest, away from the worst of it. She gathered what she could, frozen rose hips from a bush, a handful of dried lichen from a tree trunk. When she returned, Kiska was sitting up, watching the door, waiting. Something had shifted. The cabin felt different now, less empty. She sat and fed Kiska another round of broth. The cub drank with more urgency now, and for the first time, when she placed her hand near its paw, It did not flinch. Over the next week, the cold deepened. The thermometer outside the door stopped registering. But inside the cabin, something warm was growing. Kiska began to eat solid food, small strips of dried fish, softened in warm water. She watched the cub's ribs become less visible with each passing day. It tried to walk, 3 steps and a stumble. She laughed a sound that surprised even her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. The sound echoed off the log walls like something returned from a long journey. But the firewood was running low, and the snares were still empty. She would have to cut wood in this cold. 72 years old. Alone. She bundled herself in every layer she owned and stepped outside. The axe felt heavier than she remembered. The cold made everything heavier. Each swing sent a shock through her arms. The wood was frozen, solid, harder than stone. After 20 minutes, her arms were shaking. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. She kept going. Because the alternative was not going. And not going meant not surviving. The tree came down with a crack that split the silence like a rifle shot. She split what she could and dragged it back to the cabin in 3 trips. When she came inside, Kiska was at the door. It rubbed its face against her boot. She sat on the floor, too tired to reach the chair. Kiska climbed into her lap. She could feel its heart beating against hers. 2 rhythms, 1 warmth. Days blurred together. Feeding, warming, watching, surviving. Kiska grew stronger each day. Its stripes darkened. Its eyes sharpened. It began to play pawing at her bootlaces, chasing shadows from the fire. She fashioned a toy from scraps, a ball of wound cloth tied with twine. Kiska would carry the ball to her feet and wait. Again, again, again. But she noticed something else too. The cub was growing fast, faster than she expected. Its paws were already the size of her fists. This was not a house cat. This was becoming something else. She began to ration her dried fish more carefully. Kiska ate more each day. She ate less. She was losing weight. She could feel it in the looseness of her clothes, the ache in her joints. But when Kiska slept against her at night, she forgot the hunger. A blizzard came on the 9th day, the worst she had seen in years. The walls shook. The door rattled in its frame. She braced it with a chair and prayed. Kiska pressed against her legs, trembling, not from cold, from fear. She held the cub and hummed, an old Yakut song her mother had sung to her in storms just like this one. The blizzard raged for 2 days. The snow piled to the roof. She dug out the door with a cooking pot. It took over an hour. The world outside had changed. Drifts rose like white mountains. End quote. The forest had been reshaped. Her firewood pile, which she had placed under a lean-to, was buried. She would have to dig it out. Kiska appeared at the door. The first time it had ventured outside. The cub stood in the snow and looked around. Something old stirred in its blood. It knew this place. She called it back inside. It obeyed. But it looked over its shoulder at the forest before coming. Her food supplies were critically low. The flour was nearly gone. The dried fish would last perhaps 3 more days. She needed the snares to produce. She needed the cold to break. Neither seemed likely. She began eating only once a day. Everything else went to Kiska. She was getting weaker. She could feel it when she stood too quickly, the dizziness, the gray around the edges of her vision. But she would not let the cub go hungry, not while she had anything left to give. On the 12th day, she woke to find Kiska gone from its blanket. The door was open. Just a crack. Just enough. She stumbled outside without her coat. The cold struck her like a physical blow. She followed the tracks, calling the name she had given it. Kiska. Kiska. She found it at the edge of the trees, standing over something in the snow. A rabbit. Dead. Freshly caught. Kiska had hunted on its own. She stared at the cub. And for the first time, she saw it clearly, not as her companion, but as what it truly was. A tiger. Not a pet. Not a companion. A force of nature she had borrowed from the wild. She gathered the rabbit. Kiska followed her back to the cabin without protest. That night, they shared the rabbit. She cooked hers over the fire. Kiska took its portion raw. Over the next days, Kiska went out more often, always returning, always bringing something back. The cub was feeding her now. She realized this quietly, without sentiment. But each time it left, it stayed away a little longer. She knew what was coming. She had always known. You cannot keep a river in a cup. You cannot hold the forest in a cabin. She began to prepare herself, not for death this time, for something harder, for letting go. It happened on a clear morning. The sky was the deepest blue she had ever seen. Kiska had been gone since the night before, the longest absence yet. She stepped outside and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Then she heard it. Not from the forest, from the south. Voices. Human voices. 2 snowmobiles appeared over the ridge, rangers from the wildlife reserve, 60 kilometers south. They had been tracking a Siberian tiger, a female, found dead 3 weeks ago in a poacher's snare. She had been a mother. They found milk still frozen on her body. Somewhere, she had left a cub. She looked at the rangers. "The cub is here," she said. "I found it." She led them inside, showed them the blanket by the stove, the fish bones, the cloth ball. "It left last night," she said. "It goes out to hunt now. It always comes back." The rangers explained the cub needed to be relocated to the reserve where it could be rehabilitated. Splite. She knew they were right. She had always known this wasn't forever.
Chai?
They waited together. She made tea. The rangers sat awkwardly in her small cabin, holding cups too delicate for their gloves. Near dusk, a shadow appeared at the tree line. Kiska stood 50 meters from the cabin. It could smell the strangers. It would not come closer. She stepped outside alone. The rangers stayed back. She walked toward the cub slowly. She knelt in the snow, the same way she had the first time. And she waited. Kiska looked at the cabin, looked at the forest, then looked at her. It came to her, slowly, one paw at a time, and pressed its head against her chest. She held it, memorizing the weight, the warmth, the heartbeat she had come to know as well as her own. She whispered to it in Yakut, words too old and too private for translation. Then she stood and walked back to the cabin. She did not look back. The rangers moved carefully. One approached with a transport crate lined with blankets. Kiska did not fight. It went into the crate as if it understood what was happening. She stood in the doorway and watched them secure the crate to the snowmobile. One ranger stopped, turned back. "You saved its life," he said. "You know that." She said nothing. She raised one hand and held it there until the lights disappeared over the ridge. The silence returned. It filled the space where the engines had been, and it filled the space where Kiska had been. She went inside, closed the door, sat in her chair. The blanket by the stove was still warm. She could see the impression of the cub's body. She picked up the cloth ball, held it in both hands, and let herself cry. She cried for the cub, for Victor, for the years of silence, for all the things she had carried alone. When it passed, she wiped her face with her sleeve, fed the fire, boiled water for tea. Because that was what you did here. You kept going. The cold demanded it. Night came. She lay down on her furs. The floor beside her was empty. She listened for breathing that wasn't there, for a heartbeat that had gone south. Eventually, sleep came, thin and dreamless. She woke before dawn. For a moment, just one, she reached for the blanket by the stove. Then she remembered. And the remembering was its own kind of cold. She built the fire, boiled water, checked the silence. The morning was the same, but she was not. 3 weeks passed. The cold held. But somewhere beneath the ice, the earth was turning toward spring. She resumed her routines. The snares, the firewood, the tea at dawn. But she left the blanket by the stove. She couldn't bring herself to move it. One morning, the ranger returned. Just one this time, on a single snowmobile. He brought photographs, taken at the reserve. Kiska, healthy, strong, playing in a large enclosure with snowbanks and fallen trees. She traced the stripes with her finger. She knew every one of them. The ranger told her the cub was learning to hunt properly, that they planned to release it in spring. She nodded. "Good," she said. "That is where it belongs." The ranger offered to bring supplies. She accepted flour, dried meat, medicine. Before he left, he said they had named the tiger program after her, Babushka's tiger. She watched the snowmobile leave. This time, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full. She pinned the photograph of Kiska to the wall, beside the photograph of Victor, 2 faces that had kept her alive, each in their own season. Weeks turned. The light grew longer by minutes each day. She began to hear birds again, distant, tentative, but there. She thought about Kiska often, not with sadness, with something closer to gratitude. The cub had reminded her of something she had forgotten, that she was still capable of love, and that even at 72, in the coldest place on earth, a heart can still open. Spring arrived without ceremony, a crack in the river ice, a drip from the roof. She stood in the doorway and felt the air change, still cold, but alive. One morning in late March, the ranger's snowmobile returned once more. He brought news. Kiska had been released into the protected forest, 200 kilometers south, safe, free. She looked at the map for a long time. Then she looked south, through the window, as if she could see that far. He also brought a letter from the reserve director, thanking her, calling her a guardian of the wild. She placed the letter on the shelf, next to the salt and the flour, things necessary for survival. That evening, she sat in her chair and looked at the 2 photographs on the wall. She spoke aloud, to no one and to both of them. "Thank you," she said, "for staying as long as you did." Outside, the last snow of winter fell gently, soft as breath, light as a whisper. Somewhere to the south, a young tiger moved through a forest of ancient pines. It carried no memory of the cabin, no name, no warmth remembered. But it was alive, because one winter, in the worst cold, an old woman knelt in the snow. She did not save the tiger because she was brave. She saved it because she was human. And being human, truly human, means refusing to look away from a living thing in pain. The cold will return. It always does. But so will the warmth. And somewhere, in a forest she will never visit, a tiger that doesn't know her name walks free. That is enough. That has always been enough. She helped a starving tiger cub in Yakutia's frozen forest, and no one expected what it would give back to her.